Welcome to Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here is the podcast host, James Delingpole.
Welcome to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special and surprising guest, because we only organised this half an hour ago, didn't we?
If that.
Ben Spence, who I've been following on Twitter for quite some time, and I didn't recognise him when I saw him in the flesh, which is probably quite a common experience with people on Twitter. Ben is a journalist, which is amazing given that he's also a millennial, so he's kind of completely missed out on the generation where journalism was actually a trade worth entering. I'm sorry to tell you this, mate, we used to get the most amazing expense accounts. Indeed, in the early days of my journalistic career, I was working on the news desk at the Telegraph, and when you failed to put in sufficient expenses for the week, you were chastised by your superior for letting the side down.
Yes.
Can you imagine such a world?
I'm told these wonderful stories of this bygone era, but sadly these days I just have to moonlight by being a homeless person and asking for change on the street.
Well, that's it.
I like to think that that's in some way equivalent, but it's probably not really.
So
most of the homeless people are better dressed than me anyway, so
I think that's
I'm not very convincing.
You haven't got a beard.
I did have a beard. I had to get rid of it. It was ginger. It was appalling. It was it was the worst thing ever. I thought, here it is. I'll try to make myself look a bit older, a little more rugged, and it invited scorn. The other homeless people, they cast me out. They weren't having anything to do with me.
It does seem to be one of the afflictions of your millennial generation. That
we're all ginger.
You all make kimchi, and you all drink micro-brewed beer.
I don't think I've ever had kimchi in my life.
Yeah, okay. So you are the exception. Thank you.
I have had micro beer.
You've had micro beer, and what's the other shit that you? Sorry,
avocados.
Avocados.
Avocados, all right.
You live on avocados, don't you?
I mean, on a journalist's salary, no, but everybody else does. I'm just the entertaining friend they invite around to parties to go, look at him, he can't even afford an avocado, let alone a house.
Steady. Avocados in Waitrose, which can't be the cheapest place to buy them, they cost £2 for 2 ready-to-eat avocados. That's not that expensive. You could live on that.
Have you seen the state of the industry these days, James?
No, well, actually, that is true. Now, I was delighted to discover, because I'm one of those ghastly old people that likes being down with the kids. Can you imagine how much it annoys my children? But I was delighted to discover that you have been responsible for creating dank memes.
A few in my time.
How do you make a dank meme?
Well, I'm actually quite rustic. I'm quite old-fashioned when it comes to it. I find a picture, an image of something that I find slightly entertaining, and I just affix a caption to it. I just do it the old-fashioned way. I screenshot it, and then I just superimpose the text over the top. It's not difficult.
Right.
It's not difficult. It's the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah.
You see these things out there in the ether, and you think, my God, isn't that funny? It's not difficult at all. I'm not saying all of them are funny, but
you, I believe, were responsible for a lot of the memes that emerged after the Kathy Newman, Jordan Peterson encounter.
There were a few. I mean, it must be said, actually, my favourite one was something to do with a reference to the film, the BBC series, which was, which one was it? The Night Watchman. Night Watchman. There were lots of memes going on about the Night Watchman and
Night Manager.
Night Manager. That's it. Sorry,
yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Jokes about Israeli sex rings and that sort of thing. They got out of hand, I think, but there were lots of those sorts of things.
Don't all memes get out of hand?
Well, that's exactly the thing, is that a meme, I think, at the start, it has a shelf life where it's sort of available to everybody, and then very quickly it's co-opted by different groups, and it does go down a often quite dark route, which gets increasingly more funny, but if you weren't in on the joke at the very beginning, then it can be quite baffling. So I think it's quite understandable that memes are still a preserve of the young, because they move at such a pace that it's quite difficult to keep track of. I think a very good example is the Adam Smith Institute on Twitter. They're very good at memeing, but if you're not there right at the beginning, you'll just look at it and it'll just go straight over your head. You just think, this is mad. These people are insane. I can't believe that anybody would fund them. I don't even know who they are.
Yeah, this is a problem I have with Boy Delingpole, because I'm presuming he does do some work at university, but he does seem to spend an inordinate amount of time scrolling through the latest bulletins from his various Facebook in-groups, looking at every meme going. And about 5 or 6 months later, I'll finally discover a meme that he's seen ages ago.
Yeah.
And I'll ask him to explain it, and his disgust and contempt.
It's ancient
is
history.
just like,
it's gone.
God, I saw
Let it
that.
go.
Yeah. And tell me about the Sesame Street.
I mean, the Sesame Street ones are... I am not even keeping up with those right now. At the moment, to me, it's gone down two quite dark paths in terms of what is current in the Sesame Street meme world, which is that you find old clips of Sesame Street, you pause them at certain points, you take a screenshot, and then you add the caption. And the two most popular things at the moment tend to be on themes of paedophilia or the Vietnam War. So as you can imagine, if you're coming into that fresh, it's going to be a little disconcerting, shall we say? But that's currently where that community is.
That's interesting, because I would have thought your generation would not be attuned to the NARM. Because when I was growing up, the NARM was really the thing. I used to sit down with my brother and watch on VHS videos hired from these shops called video rental stores, which you'll never have come across, but they were quite a thing back in the day.
I think I read about them somewhere once.
So we would watch Apocalypse Now about 6 times back to back. Watch The Deer Hunter. Probably we'd skip past the boring bits, the wedding scene and stuff, and go straight to the Didi Mao scene.
Yeah.
And so I probably watched that about 200 or 300 times, because one never tires of watching the way that De Niro manages to get them out of the... You've seen the film?
Yeah, I've seen the film. I mean, it's worth noting that even for ill-educated millennials such as myself, we've all seen the clip of Willem Dafoe being blown up in Platoon, because that, of course, became a very popular meme. So people are aware of the existence of the Vietnam.
He assumes the Christ-like position when he's finally shot.
Yeah, everything blows up around him. Yeah, that's been done. It's been done. It is as old as the Vietnam War is.
Yeah.
You don't know, man. You weren't there.
No, exactly. But I kind of, on some level, I'd like to have been there. No, I mean,
on which side?
Well, no, not on Charlie's side. I'd like to have gone in and surfed those big waves while they.
I imagine there would have been moments, but I think possibly it wouldn't have been as fun as the Second World War. If we're going to like put it in the pantheon of things, I think you'd have rather have been in the Second World War than in the Vietnam War.
Now you're talking. I think so.
There was a hero's welcome for Second World War veterans, less so for Vietnam vets.
Yeah. And I went through a period when they were all still around and all there, I interviewed many World War II veterans. And what surprised me and kind of pleased me in a kind of Boise way is how many of them said to me that they would not have missed the experience for the world. It was just a massive, big adventure.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine that would be the same. I mean, the sense of camaraderie must have been tremendous, especially if you just signed up in the aftermath of Dunkirk and all that sort of thing. The idea of going off, doing your bit, and you're all there and you're going to swat the Hun and all that sort of thing. And the fact that they did very well must have helped. I doubt it would have been the same if they'd lost. But,
yes.
But,
indeed.
I can imagine that must have been a very character-building experience, a very healing experience after the horrors of the Blitz and all that sort of thing, to then be able to go over there and make that difference and win it. That must have been a very formative experience for lots of people.
Whereas, had you been with the Highland Division and been left behind at Dunkirk and spent the entire war as an 18-year-old boy and spending the best years of your life behind the wire in Germany, that
might explain why so many Scots are so bitter.
I don't think it's the only reason.
I'm sure it's
and
I'm glad my grandmother won't hear
Can
this.
I just apologise to our Scottish special friend at this point? Because
I'd like to apologise to my Scottish family members as well.
Scottish special friends actually have they are wonderful in their own special way.
It wouldn't change them for the world.
Or worse, if you'd been at Singapore when Singapore fell, that wouldn't have been a nice place.
No, I think it would have been a lot worse. in the South in the Pacific Theatre. I think any of that sort of thing must have been a lot worse.
But just going back to the original point, I'm very glad that you are still doing Nam memes, and I'm sure our American special friend who's actually saw the elephant in the Nam would be delighted that his sacrifice is
is a source of great amusement for the rest of us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, you're a millennial. I think you're one of the first millennials I've had on this podcast, and there's probably a good reason.
I think
for
you've
that.
had a few. Well, one or two sound people.
Aren't they
do exist.
No, aren't they post-millennials? Aren't they Generation Z and Generation?
Oh, I think we just keep extending
Hang on,
the
how old
term
are you?
millennial. So I'm 26.
Yeah, your generation has a lot to answer for, doesn't it?
Yeah, we do. I'm very sorry about that.
Why is generation so awful?
Honestly, if I knew the answer to that, I'd be a very, very wealthy man because I'd be dealing with it. But I wonder if a lot of it has got to do with the devaluation of education in this country and in the West in general. I don't think we approach education in the right way. I don't think that we're rigorous enough. I don't think that we're competitive enough. I don't think that we're ambitious enough. I think that the idea of sending so many people to universities just for the sake of sending them to universities...
That's Tony Blair's fault, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And we all know what it was. It was to massage unemployment figures. It has nothing to do with achievement. But I think that has... I'm not necessarily opposed to the commercialisation of higher education if it gets results. But this isn't actually about competition. This isn't about letting the universities fight it out to be the best. They just all ramp up the fees, and they're all of a certain amount. And it is still very true, I think, that for every academic, regardless of what university they're at, the biggest single inconvenience for them is that there are students there. They're not necessarily that interested in getting them to think differently. They just want them to pass the exams. They just want to get them in, get them out, get the fees, get the tuition fees, and get on with their lives. There is, of course, then that small cadre within the universities whose raison d'etre is to push their agenda. And they are as much responsible as the ones that just don't care. I mean, but you've gone into that at great lengths. You know all about that.
But I do quite like picking at old scabs.
Absolutely, it's nothing better.
I'm still horrified by my experience at Cambridge. At Cambridge University Conservative Association, or CUCA, as I now pronounce it, because the weird thing was that before I went to that dinner, I did a podcast with a young chap at Cambridge who afterwards was so embarrassed about the incident at the dinner that he actually begged me to not put out the podcast because his life wouldn't be worth living. And I understand that there is this climate of fear within our universities. At the same time, what he said to me was, in the podcast that will never be heard, because I've erased it now, he said that actually it was only a tiny minority of social justice warriors who set the political tone, and actually everyone else just wants to get on with their lives and be left alone. But they don't dare stick their heads above the parapet because they know the consequences.
Well, that's my experience entirely. I went to the University of Liverpool. I don't think my parents have quite forgiven me for going to the University of Liverpool.
Where is the University of Liverpool?
It's in Liverpool. Have you ever been there? It's this place that exists in the north of England. It's very exciting. For what it's worth, I loved my time at the University of Liverpool. It's a wonderful city. It's a great party city. And as much as there is a lot of socialism up there, they are very good-natured people, by and large. It's come up a great deal. As much as they like to say it's all through sort of EU investment and that sort of thing, there's a lot of sort of small business owners who have really, managed to push the city up from what it was even 10 years ago. And it is coming up a long way. Like I said, I had a great time. The university was an interesting one because that's exactly what I found, funnily enough. It's a very big university, and the political tone was set by what was actually quite a small university, feminist society, and of course at a university like that there's going to be quite a hefty presence when it comes to the university Labour students. One of the other things, of course, that stands out from my memory is just how many left-wing groups there were that didn't quite get along with each other. It was a bit like Life of Brian, with Judeans and people. And that's one of the things that always amused me, is just how unbelievably catty a lot of these people can be towards each other. There were lots of these groups, but I wouldn't say there were that many people in them overall. And yes, the majority of people, when I was there, didn't care about politics.
Yeah.
Left or right wing, they just did not care. They felt about left wing students the same way that they felt about me, for example, being sort of quite interested in sort of right wing or centre right politics, or libertarian ideas.
Yeah.
That was a bit of a okay, you're a bit funny, but I made up for it. I was good value at parties, but
that's good. You see, that one of my theories is that one of the best weapons that we on the right have against this prevailing left-wing culture is that we are funnier and wittier than the opposition.
At least amongst ourselves.
No, just objectively
Not on campus.
on every level.
No, I do agree.
Look at, when did anyone ever laugh at anything Owen Jones said, except in mockery? When did anyone sort of think that's a great gag? That's a good
He does
one.
make some quite good jokes when people are homophobic about sleeping with their fathers, but he hasn't done that in a while. That's the only time, and I have laughed. It was about 2 years ago, and to my shame I did.
Right.
Because it was that childish joke that everyone makes. Well, you're this, that, and the other. Well, your father didn't seem to mind last night. He didn't say father, but you are, that sort of joke. And there's just the puerile nature of it.
He wouldn't do that now.
No, he wouldn't do that now.
No.
Don't be silly. But once upon a time, there existed within Owen Jones. I mean, he is still a schoolboy, but there existed in him a naughty schoolboy, and now it's just an angry one that's not getting its way. But to go back to my time at university, yes, most people are just there. They're paying a lot of money in the grand scheme of things. They are aware of that. Taking on a lot of debt, they're going to have a good time, they're going to get their qualifications, and then they're going to go and they're going to get a job. And that's actually what they care about. They care about expanding their social circles, enjoying themselves, having that experience. They aren't interested in freeing Palestine or things that are happening in Myanmar. They aren't interested in that sort of thing. And it just doesn't get through. No matter how much left-wing student groups try to force those issues through at sort of student union levels or with protests, it just doesn't make that much of a dent on the average student. They are normal people. They're not going to put their head above the parapet. They're just there to get their degree, have a good time, get out.
Right. So are they so lumpen that they are not going to be receptive to... Because if this podcast has a theme, it is ultimately, how are we going to save Western civilization from the social justice warriors, from the left, from George Soros, and so on? Would you say that these apathetic students have anything within them which might be receptive to our ideas about saving the world?
Entirely possible. I think there's a great deal of common sense that comes around to the average person, let alone the average student. But my thing is, I think actually you need to go after the problem at the source, which is the academics that are ideologically driven, because it takes sort of a certain type of person who wants to dedicate their entire life to a theory about something, and that's actually where you want to win the battle, because these are the people that are infiltrating organizations. These are the ones that are infiltrating public policy units. Those are the ones that is what they want to do. You don't necessarily have to worry about the mass of people who are quite straightforward, because we've already seen that they can actually be relied upon if you give them the opportunity, as we saw with the EU referendum. You actually trust the public. By and large, they'll act in their own self-interest. They'll make a sensible enough decision. Not always, but you can't necessarily blame them for that, because they have to vote with their heart. I think if you trust them to be just normal people, often they will make the right decision. You just need to give them that agency for themselves.
Yes, although I think that often the people who voted for Brexit were those who hadn't had their brains poisoned by 3 years.
Quite often, but I do know a lot of people who went to university. I do actually know quite a lot that voted for Brexit. It's not entirely the idea. I know the majority of university-educated people voted to remain, but it's not the sort of 99% that it's often portrayed as. A good chunk of people voted for Brexit who went to university.
That's very encouraging. You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest, Ben Spence. More in a moment.
Breitbart News Daily with Alex Marlowe.
Jeannie in Pennsylvania.
I think he's gotten away from what we really hired him to do, which is draining the swamp. If you look at the real picture of draining a swamp, you go in and you take all the water out of it. What does it leave? It leaves the gunk. He cannot get rid of the gunk. We have to get rid of the gunk. Everything he's doing, he's lowering the water so we can see who needs to go. The only way they can go is if we vote them out.
Breitbart News Daily, weekdays at 6 a.m. Eastern on Sirius XM Patriot 125.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
Welcome back to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest, Ben Spence. But actually, how old's your dad?
How was my dad?
Yeah.
Oh, he's mid-50s, let's say.
Yeah, okay.
56, maybe?
So I'm going to sound like your dad now.
That's not possible.
Okay. well,
you don't sound any way disappointed enough to sound like my father.
Oh, Benedict. Which one was closer?
Second.
Oh, Benedict.
It's like, I can't say the first one in case he hears it, and then he chases me around the garden with a bit of wood.
You stupid boy. Now, I'm going to sound like your dad, in that I want to paint you a picture of the golden age in which I grew up. For example, when I went to university, and I hardly ever talk about Oxford, as people know. When I was there, I read English, and okay, there was a token Marxist in the university. His name was Terry Eagleton, and everyone went to the famous Terry Eagleton lecture. That he was at Wadham, the most left-wing college. It's the kind of the college that punches above its weight in indoctrinating the rest of the university with left-wing values. And Terry Eagleton used to give this famous lecture to the English faculty, in which he explained that it was just as valid studying the telephone directory as it was Shakespeare. You can apply the same critical techniques and blah blah blah. And everyone went, "Oh wow, my mind's been blown." And actually, that was the last lecture I went to. I just thought, I can't be asked. I do remember another tutor called Penny Boomerler, her name was, who I know was a Marxist feminist. And I remember saying to my parents, "Gosh, I'm being taught by a Marxist feminist, Mummy and Daddy." But apart from that, I do not remember in the slightest any kind of leftism from any of the faculty. We studied literature. We're there to study Keats and Yeats and Pope and Chaucer and the rest. There was none of that postmodernist bollocks that they learned at Cambridge, and these were great times. I was just lamenting to a mutual friend of ours over the lunch I've just had. Another sad thing that's happened in the interim. Yeah, free speech was an absolute given. There was it was barely considered worth defending because it was such an obvious thing, as obvious as say that the Holocaust was a bad thing, that we should never try to repeat it. You know that anti-Semitism was probably not a desirable thing. Yes. Look at what's happened to the world since. We've now got your generation. I'm sorry to have a go at you millennials, but it is a problem. Your generation saying, "Yes, I believe free speech is important, but I don't think we should have hate." It's always that word, isn't it? But hate speech,
It's always that word when they say, "I believe in," not even just free speech, "I believe in this, that, and the other," but, and the moment the letter B forms, you just sink in your stomach because you think, right, here we go. Yeah, you don't believe in any of these things at all, and I can just zone out now. I can just stop listening to you now. I know where you stand.
So they do all that in the same way. Anti-Semitism is absolutely. We've got Jews living in Europe again in the 21st century, scared for their lives.
My personal view is that is how you can always measure just how advanced a society is actually how it treats its Jewish community. If you want a barometer of which way things are going, there is no better place to look than that. And I can think of nothing more vile. Frankly, it disgusts me that educated, I don't know in fact how educated they are. I dread to think that I was ever in a class with those sorts of people. But it just sickens me that people can get themselves into such positions of authority within, we know who we're talking about here, the opposition, that this sort of thing can even be considered for a second as being in any way helpful or acceptable. I mean, I'm losing the words. It is a difficult one, but it almost makes me quite emotional. It makes me so angry that we are still finding ourselves listening to these tropes, these ideas. This was supposed to have died with the death of sort of Christianity. These long-standing prejudices. They clearly haven't died at all. They've just been replaced with something else, and it beggars belief. I think I should stop talking about it because I might say something else.
So we've lost free speech. We've got this new wave of anti-Semitic hatred. We've got this increasing intolerance towards pleasures in life that we used to accept as one of the perks for after your hard day. You can
rewards.
You can have a nice drink, a nice fag, or whatever.
For your sins.
For your sins. Have a nice bit of steak. We're now fast entering an age where everything is going. there was an incident I'm sure you're aware of when a previous podcast guest, William Sitwell, got booted out of his job at Waitrose Food magazine because he wrote a slightly intemperate email to some...
A moment of silence, please, for our fallen comrade, Mr. Sitwell.
Exactly. Okay. I mean, yeah, he can probably wear a few months off being that he is a Sitwell. Nonetheless,
yes.
I think that back in the day, when a pushy freelancer wrote to an editor, importuning him for a column, they might have been given a rude brush off like the one that William gave this freelancer, and now it's William who's in trouble. So vegans are getting more and more uppity, and I feel
it must be said, if they have enough authority and power in society that they are able to just chase people out of their jobs, he might have been onto something that we need to check their power. Yeah, frankly.
Well, no, this is what I'm getting onto. That one of the things that we get from the vegans is this sense of that they are an oppressed minority. And I'm all for respecting oppressed minorities, except it seems to me that the vegans are increasingly becoming the oppressors. They're demanding more and more rights. And I think that their ultimate end goal is to ban the consumption of meat. Because if that's what you believe... Well, of course it is. Yeah, it is.
For every vegan that says to you, well, I don't mind, you'll find plenty of others who are completely honest about not being happy about other people eating meat. And I can understand that. That's their view. That's their morality. It is understandable that often people do want to see more of their morality shared in the world. It's whether or not the rest of us should accept it. Should we lie down and go, oh, sure, yes, you just have your way? No, not at all. If you didn't have that, if you didn't want to see more of that sort of thing, what would be the point of you actually embarking on that? It would be a futile exercise. Of course, you're going to try to find converts, but all I would say is it's just very important to just stand up for what you want. If you like eating meat, if you're fine, if you can square that circle, if you can make that moral judgment that it is okay for you to eat it, well then, what's the issue? If people are prepared to do that, they're prepared to pay for these things, it keeps people in work, it keeps a large part of the economy going. I understand the arguments about animal cruelty and all that. Of course, everybody wants to see animals kept in better conditions. You and I were both great lovers of the countryside. We like the idea of animals living a good life, but actually, does that mean that fundamentally we should just do away with this very important part of our economy and culture? Absolutely not. Yeah. We're built to eat meat. We're omnivores. It's an important part of our diet. We wouldn't be where we are if we hadn't been slaughtering animals, we hadn't been hunting them. I'm sorry, that's the way of the world.
No, exactly. And this brings me on to another of my gripes about the modern world. Women. Feminism.
How is your wife, by the way?
I love my wife, and I think one of the things if I really want to annoy a feminist, and I kind of believe this, I'm afraid to say, that I think a woman's the best thing that you could say about a woman, I mean, okay, she's hot, she's really fit, got a great body, these are okay, these are nice things to have said about you, but I think to describe a woman, a girl, as good wife material, because I mean that's part of the deal about being a woman. I'm not saying they shouldn't have amazing careers as well as they want them, but ultimately we're here to
necessarily part of being the deal of being a woman. It's part of being human. Yeah, that is what it is. Ultimately, we all want companionship. We all want people who we get on with, who understand us. And yes, that is part of the deal. That's part of the social contract that we've come to. If that's not what you want, you don't have to have it. But I think still the vast majority of men and women do want that, ultimately. It might take them a while to get there, but that is what they want. And yes, of course you want somebody who is, to use a phrase, good wife material. If it was bad wife material, you wouldn't want to marry her. I mean, let's not pretend that it's entirely men that are doing the objectifying. Women do the exact same thing. Yeah. They weigh up the pros and cons. How many boxes do you tick? It's the exact same process. It's better to just be honest about that.
Yeah, I think...
Who is good wife material apart from your wife?
Who's good wife material? What? I'm trying to think.
Penny Mordaunt if she resigns from the cabinet.
Penny, yeah, she might be.
If she resigns.
She might be, yeah.
Has Priti Patel resigned?
She
just entertains me.
It's hard to keep up with what's going on in... Do we have to go there? It's so depressing. Isn't it,
No,
what's
we don't.
happening
Let's
in
not go
politics?
there. Let's have that a free zone.
But actually, now you brought it up, are we going to get Brexit or not?
Well, my view of what I think will happen is that Mrs May will not get her deal through Parliament.
Yeah, that's a given.
That's a given, which
Okay.
means that one of two things, and possibly both things, will happen. We will have to have a general election because they won't want to go to a second referendum. I don't think that she will get a majority, but I also don't think that Jeremy Corbyn can get a majority, which leaves us in limbo, which means that this deal will not be the one on the table, which means, ultimately, we'll have to have a second referendum at some point down the line. That's the only route that I see this happening, because I just don't see there being enough consensus in either parliamentary party or any of the smaller parties that might form a coalition. And we have to remember that the deal on offer is not what anybody voted for. Remain or leave. Both sides are coming out and saying this is a betrayal. This is not what we want. And I think most Brexiteers are staunchly opposed to a second referendum, and I understand why, because Brexit won the first referendum, and they think, we won the high ground, why should we concede it? To which I would reply, you don't have the high ground, you have already conceded it. We have already lost Brexit, it's not going to happen. I'm not saying that a second referendum is a wonderful thing, but I think we should be girding up for that fight. We should be getting ready for it now, not whining and saying, no, we can't have one. Because just saying that means that we're going to get a deal that we don't want. We're going to get an outcome we don't want. We should be prepared to say, of course it's against what we want, it's patronising to the public. But actually, if we trust the public to make the right decision, who's to say that they're not going to make the same decision again? I think they would in a second referendum.
It's not the public that I don't trust. It's
Well, of course.
whoever sets the terms of the referendum.
Of course, but a general election, I don't believe. This is only in what I think is going to happen.
Yeah.
In that set of circumstances, a general election isn't going to return a government that is going to be, in any way favourable to either side. So that's why I think there will only be the option of another referendum, because whatever deal we come up with after Mrs May's deal, it still won't be in any way, shape or form able to pass, or what either side voted for. So at some point down the line, I think there will be a second referendum. And I just think Brexiteers have to be ready for that. That's all I'm saying, is that we need to be ready to fight the fight all over again. And in some ways, we have ourselves to blame for that. We
Not
completely...
me.
Not you. But as a community of Brexiteers, we cocked up in the leadership campaign for the Conservative Party. There was never an agenda, a pro-Brexit agenda, because whatever happened with Mr Gove and Mr Johnson, they messed up. And that's entirely on them. But that's not to say that we should just give up all hope and go, oh, well, that's it. We need to be prepared. This is a long-term thing. This is not something that can be done with one referendum and, oh, happy days, it's done now. We need to be prepared that there might be a second one, and not just sit with our fingers in our ears saying, no, it's not fair, it's not fair. No, it's not fair. Yeah. It's not fair. Politics isn't fair. We are going to have to keep on fighting for this, and we must be prepared for a second referendum. It would be a dereliction of duty if we weren't.
You are wise, very wise for one so young. And
seen some things, man.
Have you seen some? Yeah.
Went to the University of Liverpool.
That's true. That's true.
Lost many good friends.
I think you're right. I think that one of our mistakes. I think because we are basically goodwill people. Look, Brexit was a vote for optimism. It was a belief in Britain's independent future. So I think the people who voted for it tend to be of a sort of positive frame of mind.
Yeah.
The people who voted Remain tend to be declinists. People who believe that Britain's seen its best days and really cannot be trusted to have a life of its own.
Yeah.
Has to have its laws decided for it by foreign judges. And
in many ways, it's a strangely conservative attitude to take. The view that, well, we've already fallen this far, let's try not to get any worse. But like you say, it's a very pessimistic view. It's a very pessimistic branch that does exist in conservative thinking. Well, and it's the one that we have to oppose. Because if you are just very pessimistic about everything, well, what on earth is going to get better? This is the key thing. It might... I don't know. I'm not an economic expert. It might get worse. It probably will get worse in the short term if we had hard Brexit. But come on. Is it going to be the end of the world? Are we going to... Is the ground going to open up and Armageddon and the legions of darkness pour forth? No, don't be ridiculous. It'll be a little bit tough because the EU are going to make it difficult. They're going to try to make it hurt. But that's on them. It is then, at that point, up to us to make our own future. That's the key thing. You can keep on being the victim and saying, oh, but look what the EU will do to us. Yeah, they are going to try and do to this. It'll be worse if you let them, which is what this deal does. And it's what Remain will do as well.
I get a lot of grief from my readers at Breitbart who are pretty UKIP, I would say, and also from quite a lot of my Twitter followers who think that I have far too much faith in the Conservative Party to do the right thing. And I think they're wrong, simply for the fact that the Conservative Party is the kind of majority party for the right. And if we ever enter a period in which UKIP is the deciding force in politics, it means we've gone through absolute revolution hell for that to happen.
It's an interesting thing, actually. One of my key reasons for voting Brexit is I am of the Peter Hitchens school of thinking, which is that the major issue facing British politics is the Conservative Party, in that it doesn't exist to be conservative, it exists to serve the interests of the people that are running it, and that it needs to be reformed. And my view has always been that it would take us leaving the European Union in order for that to happen, because I don't want the Conservative Party to die necessarily, but I don't think it should exist in its current form. And my view has always been that that would have to happen in order for that to change. It doesn't just stop at the Conservative Party, though. Let's look at Labour. We all know what's going on there. Let's look at the Liberal Democrats. Let's look across the whole of the political spectrum. Our politicians are not fit for purpose, and they have used Europe as a shield to hide behind their ineptitude for far too long.
Yeah.
The thing is, if we were in many other countries, right now we'd be talking about a third party emerging. I think it's a pretty damning indictment of the state of our politics that we're talking about the emergence of a centrist party, and not one that actually represents the sodding people. But this is the real thing for all, I'm sorry to say, to all your UKIP listeners. It is a sign of how bad our politics are, because UKIP are as bad as the rest of them. This is a huge gap to be exploited. And what are they doing? They have completely failed to take the initiative that has been taken in Italy with Messrs Salvini and Conte, and across certainly the east and south of Europe. Plenty of people have grabbed the opportunity by the horns. Mr. Trump has done so in America. Whatever you think of him, he has done that very well. And where is UKIP in all of this? They had the opportunity, and they've surrendered the field as much as Tory Brexiteers have. And I think a lot of them have to be very ashamed of themselves. I think, having worked so hard to get so far, I now think, well, where are they? What's going on now?
Yeah.
They're a non-entity now.
But what do you think they should have done?
They should have kept on hammering home the point. I think Nigel Farage shouldn't have stepped down. I understand why. And I think that was within his prerogative to do so. He'd done more than most people to carry the argument. But I think possibly he was a little bit too naive. That we'd seen it through. I think it needed a lot more cohesion within UKIP. I mean, I remember when there was the whole Stephen Wolfe fiasco. Now, he was actually a very good politician, and he would have made a very good leader of UKIP. And I wrote an article for The Independent saying he would be an excellent leader, whatever you think of his politics as an individual. Very sound, very agreeable, very clear. And it being UKIP 24 hours, they'd literally knocked him out of the race.
Yeah.
That moment right there, I think the whole Paul Nuttall thing was a bit of a fiasco, but whilst there was that opportunity to have a sensible politician, a proper politician leading that party, that was the chance. They did that to themselves. They did that to themselves because they lacked discipline, they lacked any sort of focus beyond Brexit, and they thought they'd got Brexit, at which point it became a free-for-all.
Yeah.
And, well, that way it went.
The point I was going to, rewinding slightly, the point I was going to concede to my UKIP critics about the Conservative Party is that I do believe, along with Martin Durkin and others, that the Thatcher Revolution was an aberration in Conservative history. And that actually, if you look at the 20th century Conservative leaders, look at Macmillan and Hume, look at Heath and Cameron, they're much more in line with where the Conservative Party has been in the 20th century than Margaret Thatcher, who was a radical.
Yeah.
And you remember the people who Margaret Thatcher replaced around the time of people like the Wets, like Jim Pryor and so on.
Yeah.
The Conservative Party was the party of managed decline. That look, Britain is never going to be what it was.
Well, the city of Liverpool knows all about that, and they don't forget it. The whole idea of managed decline, which, it must be said, it was a wickedness. It was a wickedness, but to take communities like that and essentially also then to surrender them. You know, they'll never vote for the Conservatives again in Liverpool.
Well,
Why?
you're saying that was a pre-Thatcher problem.
I'm saying that it has been something that has been in the pipeline for a very long time, because I think we became very complacent. That's essentially what I think happened with the end of empire and all of that. I think we became complacent, and we lost the plot. We lost the right to govern because we lost that steel. And the idea then became one of managed decline. Let's not let it all go to pot too quickly, slowly, because there was the view that it was inevitably going to decline. But that's what I think.
I don't think it's just purely a lack of steel. I think it's a lack of intellectual and, more importantly, ideological heft. I think most
Although, of course, that was
MPs
one of the great advantages of empire, was that you didn't have too many intellectuals in high places. You did people that knew what their jobs were.
Yeah, okay. Now,
that's
actually,
as an aside.
Look, the French do intellectuals, and look where it's got them.
Exactly.
They've not just ruined themselves, but a lot of the world. I mean, it's people like Derrida and Foucault and Lacan.
But there's always a Houellebecq.
Yeah,
there's always one. Yeah. But it's a very French thing. Sorry.
yeah. But
very French thing to just give us all of that dross and then throw in somebody wonderful just to go, well, why not?
Okay, it's not lack of intellectuals that is the problem, but it is lack of ideologues. Look, Tebbo, blessed Lord Tebbit, he was always the exception rather than the rule. You had a few think tanks creating Margaret Thatcher's bolder policies and stuff, but then as now as then. The Conservative Party is riddled with Sarah Wollaston is an obvious example. Anna Soubry, Ken Clarke. These people are not conservatives by my definition of the term.
By anybody's definition.
Well, no, that's not true, because actually you'll get lots of people who say that the whole point about conservatism is it's a broad church, and this is almost even Jacob Rees-Mogg's line.
Yes, but he's almost too agreeable for his own good sometimes, Jacob Rees-Mogg. He's a wonderful man, but that will be his downfall, is that he's so very accepting of people like that who will stab him in the back at the first opportunity. But it must be said, I think the main issue is, we're talking about ideologues not having a sort of a firm ideological centre, that there's been lots of talk about how it is that the Conservatives can get their message across. The one that's always talked about is how they're going to win over young people. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of talk, and there's no doing. Let's be honest, we know what the issues are that are going to affect people, whether or not they become Conservative voters long term. Things like housing. Yeah. What actually is being done on that? We know what needs to be done. They need to build more houses and let young people buy those houses. That is how you create nuclear families. That is how you create young Conservatives, because most people start off quite left-wing when they're young, and they gravitate towards the right. Why? Because there are certain functions, there are certain institutions that allow them to have something, to have a stake in society that they want to protect, so that they don't want to rip it all down. If you don't do that, you're not giving those people a chance in hell of voting for you. Yeah. The Englishman's home is his castle, so let him bloody have one, rather than rent it.
Do you know, Ben, I think maybe you should be our next Prime Minister. How do we parachute you into the Conservative Party and get you in there?
Leopard print heels. That would be a great start.
Yeah, you'd be, and you'd win the transgender vote. It would be a win-win situation. Wow. You're listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest, Ben Spence.
Breitbart News Tonight with Joel Pollack and Rebecca Mansour.
A lot of people not knowing what action they could or should take to make the difference. What I do is try to turn people on to sites like Breitbart, people who are writing and publishing the truth so that people will get educated. But, you kind of can't blame productive members of society who are kind of confused, perplexed as to what do we do to take this government back.
Sirius XM Patriot Channel 125.
This is Delingpole, a Breitbart.com podcast. Here once again is James Delingpole.
Welcome back to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special guest, Ben Spence. Ben, the mission ahead of us is to save Western civilization, obviously, but also to preserve our entertainments. And these entertainments range from fags, still some, for the American listener.
What have you heard?
American special friends. that means cigarettes. I mean, isn't that one of the weird things that's happened?
Well,
in
yes.
the world?
If we're going to lose our culture, we might as well have a good time doing it. I suppose
Yeah.
they can't take that away as well.
Exactly. So fags, cigarettes, booze, meat, sugar,
If we were in America, we'd be talking about guns. Sadly, we don't have that many.
guns.
Although,
Oh, can I tell you
funny,
my ambition?
Yeah, go for it.
My new ambition, and actually, I've got a cunning plan. The thing I want a Beretta over and under shotgun. I went shooting the other day, and I didn't hit a thing because I was really crap. But I reckon that if I had a really good, expensive gun, I would A, get in more practice, and B, kill more things.
I'm about to give away a rather big hint about my upbringing. I was on my school shooting team. We went to national competitions. Sadly, we didn't do as well as we should have done. We were very good, but we took the whole thing as just a jolly boys' day out, rather than a serious competition. But no, absolutely.
I take it
better.
you went to a state school, Ben.
Oh, absolutely. Nothing but the best.
Yeah. So do you ever get invited on shoots?
Occasionally, yeah. More when I go back to visit my family in Norfolk. There's a lot more shooting than there is in London.
You see, you're very lucky. I'm being basically a pleb from a Midlands industrialist family. I don't have the connections. I got invited to William Sitwell's shoot the other day. That was great, really good fun.
Had to let off a lot of steam.
Just he's got a really good set of mates, and actually
does, yeah.
the camaraderie as you just get slowly pissed.
Oh yeah, it's the best way that you can spend a sort of a day. Frankly, I mean that and skiing, both whilst pissed. What else do you need? Let's be honest.
And it's one of those very rare occasions where chaps can go off and do. Occasionally, you get a wife who stands.
But they're always very sound. That's the thing. You get nothing but the soundest. No. And they're there with your drinks, or they're loading for you in some very, very rare occasions. But they're always brilliant, and they're always with a good sense of humour. That's where you find really wonderful people.
This is the Britain that I'm struggling to preserve. I'm fighting to preserve. Indeed.
I'm trying to stay in it.
Yeah.
And go back at weekends.
So, how do we win the culture wars? Sorry, big question, but I think you're up to it.
Yeah, it's a hell of a question. I'm going to be honest. I am actually quite optimistic. I think that these things, as long as people maintain their stance on these things, I think these things tend to ebb and flow. You know, we've had the sort of the period in the 60s where everything became very liberal, very acceptable, and then it contracted, and then it went out. Yeah, that's what I think is often the way. I think the important thing is that people stand steadfastly against those who try to curb the fun. If you're still having fun, keep on having fun. That's the main thing. And show other people that what you're doing doesn't hurt anybody. It might hurt you, but it doesn't hurt anyone else. And that it is an enjoyable thing, that it's not immoral. I mean, drinking in airports, that was the big thing that we've heard in the last few weeks, that might be banned in the morning because it causes raucous behaviour and badly.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever had the misfortune of going to Luton Airport of a morning, but it is worse than anything you can possibly imagine, bar none.
Yeah.
It is a dreadful place. Stansted Airport is like the seventh circle of hell.
Yeah.
You get through the labyrinth of duty-free, and then you get to the departures lounge, and it is crammed of screaming children and holidaymakers, and everybody's sat in the same area, and they all look miserable under that sort of awful white lighting that you can see every sort of blemish on your face. What would I do in that airport if I couldn't have a drink? I'm not saying get paralytic. Just give me something. I can't smoke. I can eat meat, I suppose, but there's lots of things that I can't do. But drinking is something that we can all do. Most people are actually very well behaved, if we're being honest.
Yeah.
It's always a minority that are misbehaved.
Yeah.
And there's always going to be that in any walk of life. And the rest of us shouldn't suffer for that. And let's be honest, it's part of our heritage. It's a part of being British, along with drinking on the train, the only other time that it's acceptable to drink in the morning. And actually, I've only ever seen an incident on a train, somebody misbehaving once, and that person wasn't drunk. That person was mentally ill. I've been on many trains across the United Kingdom, as awful as they are. Always there's somebody drinking if you're on there in the morning. Never been a problem.
No.
Not once. Actually, I think by and large, we're a very civil people. We know what we like. We know what's good for us. Nobody is that stupid to think that they can drink however many pints every day and that it won't have an effect on them. That's their choice to make. They're already paying for it, and the taxes that are being levied on their drinks. Yeah. Taxes that are already being levied on, the farming industry. That's already very difficult. So they know that if they eat a lot of meat, they're going to get high blood pressure. Everybody already knows about cigarettes. I challenge you to find the person who doesn't know that cigarettes are bad for them.
What?
You didn't know?
No.
Word on the street is, James.
It's no. I tell you what. It's why I never drink whiskey, bourbon particularly, because I look at the Jack Daniel's ads, and then I see in the bottom corner something that says drinkaware.co.uk.
Well, that's what hip flasks are for.
And
so
you've
you
got
don't
to drink
have to see that.
responsibly.
Yeah, so you don't see that nonsense. It's why I think there's going to be a big market for carafes if they start doing that on wine bottles. Everybody will just go, all right, then fine. Because actually, no, you don't want to see the thing that you're buying that's going to give you a good time lecturing to you. You don't want to be lectured by an inanimate sodding bottle.
Am I right that the Irish are going to put health warnings?
That is certainly being mooted at the moment, yes.
It's absolutely extraordinary, isn't it?
Ireland of all places.
Yeah.
Ireland of all places.
I was in Ireland at the weekend, and I like the Irish. I know they don't think much of us, but I like being with them. They're funny and they're
you got to have a sense of humour.
Well, exactly.
It's a bit like the Jewish sense of humour. You've got to have a sense of humour, frankly.
Yeah.
And you go through a lot of hardship. It will create some very funny, very inventive, very clever people. Also very welcoming people.
Yeah.
Same with the Israelis. As much as there's this image that's painted, I have found nobody more sort of friendly than people who come from countries that have had a pretty awful history, by and large.
Yeah.
It does breed a lot of tolerance in people, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And so Ireland is... I went about 20, 30 years ago when I was a sort of cub reporter on the Telegraph, and I went out there with the local stringer, who I think was called Paddy Clancy. And he took me on a pub crawl, and I think I had 7 pints. And normally I'm gone by 1.5. And it was Guinness, and my bottom fell out, and it was just appalling. But Dublin was like being inside a kind of cancerous lung in those days. It was grim, but at the same time rather wonderful. It was like being in a kind of Irish play.
Something out of a Withnail and Ice scene in a pub. Looked like the inside of a lung, and it smelled like it too. That sort of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That was the quote I was reaching for. And now you may as well be in Riga or any European international city.
Or indeed any of the pubs in London.
But the depressing thing is the way the Irish have embraced politically correct culture, the nanny state culture, and they've embraced the whole Europhile thing.
I think a lot of that, embracing the whole Europhile thing is because it's something that isn't British. I think that it's a reaction against sort of Britishness.
Yeah, they've exchanged one oppressor for the far greater
Well,
oppressor.
it's a funny one because I write quite a bit about Southern Europe and about Eastern Europe, and one of the best quotes that I've heard for the fall of the Iron Curtain and the countries like the Czech Republic and Hungary that came over from the East to the West is how they view this cultural shift, and they refer to it as a colourless revolution. That there was no revolution, nothing changed. They just changed who it was that they were a part of. There was no magnificent fanfare and everything got better. They just swapped the one ideology for the other. It wasn't a revolution at all. It was very, very dull. And I think a similar thing has happened in Ireland, except that they've just swapped Britishness or Catholicism, whichever one you want. I think they'll snap out of it. I think, like I said, there's an ebb and flow. I don't think that the European Union is going to last indefinitely. History says it won't. All great empires, whatever they're built on, be it economics, be it on conquest, they don't last. And I don't think that Europe
it's not a great empire.
Well, it's trying to be. That's
Right.
the thing. No, it's not a great empire.
It's a crap empire.
It is a rubbish empire, but they are trying their very best. The thing is, they're trying in a way that just can't work because there are too many disparate cultures that have been brought in with too many differing economies far too quickly. Italy is a fantastic example. Italy is a vast economy by a global scale, but it is two separate economies. The 4 largest northern provinces of the 21 in Italy account for more than half of the revenue. That's not including Rome. That's not like a London situation where you've got a powerful capital city. That's not including the capital city. You get to Rome, and everything below that is a different culture. In Italy, they're very rude about it. They say that when Garibaldi united Italy, he in fact divided Africa. That was often the motto of the Lega Nord, which is Matteo Salvini's party. But you find that across Europe, and it does create a lot of resentment, a lot of tension, especially in the East, where you have these societies that broke free of the yoke of communism. And they did that by trying to reassert their national identities. And now they're being talked down to by Germany, France, and the Benelux countries. Those countries, France accepted, it's mainly being driven by Germany, who have this idea that what is desirable is post-national identity, that it should be all the same, it should be all homogenous, and that it should be Europe. And I think that most other peoples in most of these other countries just plain do not like that idea. They like the trade. Everybody loves trade. They love the free movement. Everybody quite likes being able to go abroad quite easily and being able to walk around. They don't like being told specifically what their culture has to be. And that, I think, is the fundamental root of the culture wars, is being told what your culture should be rather than being allowed to have it, have it develop itself naturally and having that culture yourself. And I think you wanted to know, how do we win the culture wars? By letting people have their own culture, up until the point that it doesn't impede on other people's. That's the key thing. That is multiculturalism in its truest form, actually. It's not, telling everybody, oh, you've got to be tolerant of everybody's culture. It's just letting people have their own culture up until the point that it impacts, the cultures of others, and not having a culture that stands in front of another one and goes, right, you've got to stop that right now because my minority culture is, oppressed, and therefore you can't do that.
Yeah. I think it's not uncoincidental that Trump chose Warsaw as the place to give the most important speech of his presidency. The Warsaw speech just lays out what Western civilization is, why it's worth fighting for, and the Poles get it.
Yeah, Mr. Kaczynski views Poland as true Europe, as the defender of true European values. And it must be said, I don't necessarily agree with all of the policies of himself and Mr. Orban. I dislike the fact, but this can also be applied to the British government as well. I dislike the fact that not more, certainly when we talk about the migration issue, one of the real bugbears for me is that it has been very, very indiscriminate in a lot of ways, in that it has let in anybody, first come, first served. But, for example, the thousands of Syrian Christians and Coptic Christians that are suffering in the Middle East, where is their freedom? Where is their protection? If those countries want to posit themselves as truly culturally European, well, they are an oppressed minority who are really oppressed. We're not talking about people who are being mispronounced or whatever. That is a serious wickedness. And those countries, as much as they stand up for Western values, that is a Western value right there, is giving sanctuary to people like that. And those people still aren't being let in. But we have to bring it back here. What on earth is that whole Asha Bibi thing about? The poor woman from Pakistan.
Absolutely.
Why is she not here right now? Right now, this second. It is an outrage to all of our sensibilities. I can see that you feel the same way.
Totally.
That nobody is prepared to really, and I do mean politicians here, apart from Sajid Javid, but I might even go as far as to say, I understand why he wouldn't, because they'd say that there are more important things happening with Brexit and all that, but this is a really important issue that we, as Brits, if there is one, sort of moral that we do have, is that sort of thing, we do not tolerate that.
Yeah, I agree. It's a perfect "this is who we are" opportunity, because, I mean, she's. No, I'm like you. I'm absolutely aghast. She's in fear of her life. She's a Christian. What's not to like?
She hasn't committed a crime. Even under the laws of that country, she hasn't committed a crime. She's just been accused of it.
Yeah.
It is appalling.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever watched Jeremy Paxman's documentary series about the British Empire. One of the things that's always struck in my mind as being fundamentally, the British moral view, British value, is doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And there's the opening line to one of his programs. He's talking about when the British outlawed in India the practice of
sooty.
Yes.
And
when
sweep. Sorry.
Afterwards. Sweeping up. When they outlawed that practice, and a group of Hindu clerics went to whoever the governor was at the time and said, this is our custom, and you have to accept it.
Yeah.
And what he said is, I'm prepared to accept your customs, but you must also accept my custom, which is that when somebody does something as barbaric as that, we put a rope around his neck and hang him. And I think when it comes to that, it's exactly that point. When it comes to the point where you're endangering people's physical safety, then okay, fine, you can step in. But that is the right thing, is giving sanctuary to somebody like
Why do we not adopt this attitude to modern barbaric cultural practices like
we're cowards.
FGM?
Oh, because we're cowards.
Just...
We don't want to offend people.
No.
The whole FGM thing, I can't remember what the statistics are about how few cases, if any, have ever been prosecuted.
I think it's none.
But we all know that it's going on. And I just think, well, I don't know. I'm not in a position to influence this. There are a lot of people in this country who are in a position to stop that and should be thoroughly ashamed of themselves.
In the same way, that, going back to Asha Bibi, the thing that really appalled me was there seemed to be two arguments. The less disgusting but still disgusting argument was, well, what if our foreign embassies get attacked by mobs? Okay, well, that's the deal. You know, if you're in a foreign embassy in hostile terrain,
why have we got diplomatic ties with those countries? If that's the sort of thing that they think is acceptable, well, I think most British people would say thanks, but no thanks. Actually, you're not in any way, shape, or form the sort of people we want to do business with.
But that's the lesser disgusting argument. The most disgusting argument is the idea. They hinted at this, at least, that it might inflame certain communities within Britain.
Well, how far do they plan to get inflamed?
Yeah. Well,
if it crosses a line, you send them to prison. What's the issue? If they're going to try and do anything like that, you send them to prison. You say this is not acceptable behaviour. We wouldn't accept it if it was any other group in society. You know, if it was the far right saying you can't let this person in and they decided to riot or anything like that, you'd send them to prison. And everybody would say,
the far right would get locked up just for a kind of dodgy tweet. It's the bar is much higher for certain communities. And
absolutely, but
goes against the principle of equality before the law.
Yeah, this is the key thing, actually, is I don't think that we should be scared of inflamed. If people are angry, they're entitled to be angry. I very much disagree with them. It is, if it gets to a certain stage where they behave in a certain way that is unacceptable to us, you send them to prison. You warn them, you give them plenty of notice. They are citizens of this country. They have to abide by those laws. I'm sorry, that's just the long and short of it.
I feel now I've discovered that you're an expert on Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. That I ought to pick your brain a bit more in the last minute or so. Have you been travelling over there? And
I've been there a fair bit, especially in Italy, it must be said, and recently in
Italy. Tell me what's going on in Italy then.
Well, Italy is a fascinating example because as much as we all like to talk about Brexit, Italy really is the breeding ground where so many of these things come to the fore in Europe generally. And the coalition politics that are at play between the Lega and the Movimento Cinque Stelle are very interesting to watch. Everybody seems to have this idea in this country that they are a united front. They're not. They have very different ideas of the future of where Italy should go. One is right-wing, one is left. Both are also not quite as sound as you might think. They're quite authoritarian. Certainly the Lega are. They are very much in favour of things like sugar taxes and things like that.
Are they?
Yeah, there are some issues they're very good on, but as with all political parties, there are some that they really aren't very good on. What is happening with the EU budget, on the one hand, I really do applaud, standing up to them over the budget. I think that is a very brave thing, and I think it's necessary that more people do it. But the idea that Italy is about to crash out of the European Union, that's just not likely. The problem is Italy, of course, has a vast amount of sovereign debt. It belies the fact that actually most Italians are quite good savers. They have very low levels of personal debt. It's entirely as a result of government policy. And a lot of that is, of course, held by Germany. It is not in the interests of the European Union for Italy to crash out because a lot of people will lose a lot of money, and that will affect...
It's the third biggest economy, isn't it?
That'll affect other economies. If Italy goes, what will happen with France? Everybody, people don't pay too much attention to France. France is not necessarily in the best financial situation, and it has a lot of interest in Italy remaining part of the Eurozone, remaining part of the system, and being kept stable, because otherwise France is the next one. And of course, Germany doesn't want any of these things to collapse.
Right.
It's part of the reason Germany is so keen for us to stay in, because we are financially soluble, and they need more countries like that to prop up the ones that aren't. But from that sense, then, the Italians are doing, I suppose, quite a mob sort of tactic of trying to extort more concessions from the European Union. And
like it's a mafia type thing.
Yeah, more or less, without meaning to sound too stereotypical. It's important to remember, though, that the packages that the Italian government are proposing are not going to fix things in Italy. They are a start. Things like freezing VAT, that sort of thing. It's a start, but universal basic income isn't going to work.
Right.
It's not going to reignite the economy because, as I've already pointed out, a lot of Italians know that their economy is in a lot of trouble. They're not spending a lot of money as it is. They'll just save it like they did in Norway when they tried to bring it. It's not going to actually invigorate the economy at all. So they really are. They're trying lots of things, but there's no guarantee. What actually needs to happen in Italy for that to change is a serious reform of the country's legal system, but also the sort of unofficial ways of doing things. It's interesting that we bring up the mafia as ever with Italy. You can't really go too long without talking about it. Cosa Nostra, meaning our thing, started as an alternative form of government, because Italy is actually a very young country and went through many, many occupations and conquests by everybody from Normans to Spaniards to Bourbons to Ottomans to, lots and lots of factions controlling it. The idea, therefore, of sort of local mafia families, before it became a criminal enterprise, was that it was a system in place whereby you could guarantee that things would get done. A lot of these things still remain in place, these sort of unofficial ways of doing business. And that is it's much a cultural thing that needs to shift.
Well, it's not going to, is it?
No, it's not. Italy, like I said earlier, Italy is two separate economies, and the south is so different from the north that just by cutting taxes and what have you, that's not going to affect anything. One thing that Italy does need is to be able to devalue its own currency, which it can't do whilst it's in the Eurozone, but they're not going to kick Italy out of the Eurozone because that would send the wrong message. So my fear is it's just going to continue on in this limbo. What Salvini and Conte will do, and Di Maio, the big figures in the five-star movement, what they are going to do is try to extract as many things as they can for political game. But this is something that we do need to bear in mind going forward. Liberal politicians in Italy, the established politicians, they are completely cut out now. Berlusconi, Renzi, whatever you might think of them, they're not coming back for a while. They're not going away, per se, but they're not getting back into power for a while. So it is entirely a straight fight between these two factions. They are not best friends. They are just in a marriage of convenience. And each other, they're looking at the other one and waiting for the other one to slip up. If it goes well, both sides share the credit. If one side slips up on something, as you might have noticed, Salvini talks a lot about migration, about Italian morals and cultural values and that sort of thing, the Movimento 5 Stelle are happy to leave him to that. Because if he messes up, well, that's on him, it's not on them. But if it goes well, then they both share the credit.
Right.
This is what's going on there now. I think it might last quite a bit longer than the average Italian government does, because in many ways the competitiveness plus the anti-Brussels sort of united front that they're able to pose works quite well. But they're not going to leave anytime soon. They don't have the mechanism to leave like we did in the same way. So I think it'll continue in that Mexican standoff for a while, and that'll just preserve the relationship even longer. But I do continue to worry about the state of the Italian banks, and for that reason alone I am quite glad that we never got deeper into the economic union with the European Union, because if that ever goes wrong, I'm not saying that it will, if it does, that's a catastrophe for the rest of the Eurozone.
That was a model answer. I've vivaed you, and I can now give you a first.
Wonderful.
Well done. Which I bet
that was worth all those tuition fees, wasn't it?
Mind you, they probably give them away with cornflake packets, don't they, at Liverpool?
Oh yeah, I don't have to answer questions for it if I'm offended by them.
I've seen
Sheffield University.
How many firsts do they give away nowadays?
Not enough. I didn't get one, so I want to know where it is. It's because I had a great time, Yeah. That's how you can tell.
Ben, it's been great talking to you, and
lovely talking to you
we'll have you back. We can talk about Eastern Europe next time.
Please do. Let's go get
you were listening to the Delingpole podcast with me, James Delingpole, and my very special and very informed guest, I think we can all agree, Ben Spence. Thank you and goodbye.
Sonny's Corner with Sonny Johnson.
Well, if you're not a globalist, if you're not a citizen of the world, then you must be let me check my PC handbook. Oh, there it is, right there in the book. You can't say that you're a nationalist, especially if you're a white man, because then it must mean that you are a white nationalist.
Sonny's Corner, Saturday at 1 p.m. East on Sirius XM Patriot 125.